Welcome to this presentation on search engine optimization and driving traffic to your website. The title is Let's 10x That. And 10x is kind of, 10 times. A very ambitious goal in legal services. The sense I get from legal aid traditionally is that we already have a problem of too many people know about us, and we have overflowing waiting rooms, and we don't have the capacity to deal with more people. So let's, obscurity is good. It means we'll have fewer people. But the website mentality of delivering legal information online to as many people as possible can really go against that. And we can talk about increasing and multiplying the amount of people we serve. And I think the more we can do that, the more we can grow year over year and compete with Nolo.com and places like that, the more funding we can attract to online services. So our panel today, we've got three highly experienced folks who have created tools of various sorts online using SEO. So could we just go down the line and you can introduce yourself quickly? Oh, by the way, I forgot to introduce myself. My name is Jonathan Pyle. I'm the Contract Performance Officer at Philadelphia Legal Assistance, the LSC grantee in Philly. Go ahead.
Hi, I'm Margaret Hagan. I'm the Director of the Legal Design Lab at Stanford Law School.
Hi, everyone. I'm Rohan Pavluri. I'm the CEO and co-founder of Upsolve. We're the largest bankruptcy nonprofit provider in America.
And I'm Susan Che. I'm the Executive Director of Ohio Legal Help, and we are the newly redesigned statewide information website and portal for Ohio.
Great. Let's start off with hearing from Rohan to talk about how Upsolve has used SEO to increase its traffic.
Hi, everyone. My name is Rohan Pavluri, and Upsolve last year, we relieved over $100 million in debt for 2,500 low-income families, and we had 1 million site visitors, predominantly through search engine optimization. So excited to share what we learned in the process of driving that traffic, which eventually allowed us to reach low-income families who needed our help. So the first thing is why is SEO important? In my mind, SEO is the best channel available to reach low-income families at scale for nonprofits. The reason I believe that is because when there's so many people Googling their problems, being the first hit or the second hit that they see is the best way to reach a lot of low-income families. And SEO I feel so strongly about because when you're giving away a service for free, competing with paid ads is a really, really hard thing to do. But there are defensible advantages as a nonprofit to win search. So today I'm going to talk about some basics of content and some basics of link building, which are two of the most important things in order to win SEO and win search. So this is why I think it's such an important channel. And in the legal services world, there is a big emphasis on partnerships in order to reach people, working with other nonprofits, working with courts. And I think that's really, really important. But I think equally important is reaching people who are Googling online for help. And I think that's an extreme amount of white space that's really undervalued in the legal services community compared to what I think it should be. And one thing that's really important to keep in mind too is SEO is very much a zero-sum game. The first hit and the second hit for SEO get the lion's share of results compared to everyone else. And if somebody else in the first hit, you're not in the first hit. So I think it's a responsibility within the nonprofit community to really beat the bad actors, the people who are trying to take advantage of marginalized communities and really be there as the resource that people see if they're being evicted from their homes or sued for their debt or need a restraining order against an abusive spouse. So even though I am about to tell you what I think really matters and sort of what the community generally thinks matters, it's important to keep in mind that there is no perfect formula and that the Google search engine algorithm is a black box. In fact, I have a friend who works in marketing at Google, and when Google launches content, the people who work on one side of Google on the content for their products don't actually talk to the engineers. There's a firewall in between. So even people at Google don't know exactly how SEO works if they're in certain parts of Google. So one thing that I think is really important is like just be very direct about what your purpose is, and first to really figure out what is the specific issue you want to win for SEO. Do you have some sort of new housing initiative and you can take on volume and really like is housing in Ohio the issue that you really care about, or bankruptcy in Florida, and really look up search volume to understand what the first or sort of what the playing field is. So I'd say that's the first thing is, and there's tools, and I actually have my email at the end. If you just send me an email, I kept out the specific, the tools that we use, but I can send it to you in an email. It's just like very easy for you to find. But looking up search volume, and then based on that search volume, creating the content. Like really the best SEO, the best way to win search is content. And if you match searchers' intent with content that you create that's really good for them, that's the underlying thesis of who wins SEO, and I really do believe in that. And another important reason for content to be good is like Google does recognize good content by and large by the time that people spend on your site. So the better your content, the more time people will spend on your site, and the more Google will recognize that. So really trying to create the best content is very important. So here's one formula for sort of creating content. First, doing research to figure out what specific questions people are asking. And like one way to figure out what people are asking is to use like certain tools like Keywords Anywhere or Ahrefs or Moz, which are really industry standard. And if you're doing search, you should like use these tools, and there's so many free tools that everyone should use. You should not think about doing SEO without using these tools, because your competitors in the for-profit world are using these tools. And really, everybody has competitors in the for-profit world, because anybody who shows up above you in search is your competitor. So really acknowledging that, I think, is really is important.
Could you repeat the names of those free tools
for sure.
again?
Like Keywords Anywhere is a great, and really, I encourage everyone to send me an email. Like I have a template email to respond to everyone with these. But Keywords Anywhere, Moz, and Ahrefs, spelled Ahrefs, and then Google Search Console. And then just another thing is just figuring out when you type in a search term, like Google has that autofill of what you might be thinking, what your intent is, and those are based on what other people are searching. So that will help you figure out like the type of content to create. So figure out what specific questions people are searching, and then do research to figure out what you think can win. So like Google the queries, and then figure out like what are your competitors, and like maybe people don't like to use these words competitor, but these are competitors, and figure out what your competitors in search, what type of content they have, and if it's really not that great, then you know you could potentially beat them. And really start with opportunities where the existing content you really feel is not good. And how do you determine content's good or not? When you read it, do you feel like it's really answering the questions? Is it thorough? Is it written by an expert? And if it's not, then I really recommend you going after that. And really writing like a 600, 2,000 word content piece to win those terms. And everybody will tell you something different about how long does the content need to be, but the important things are around unique content, so don't copy and paste from somewhere else, and then making it long enough. I think between 600 and 2,000 is a good ballpark. Some people will give you exact numbers that are lower, higher than this, but I think by and large I do recommend like 600 to 2,000 word content. So in terms of content, and this is I think really important in terms of this community of TIG and LSC and ITC, is to take distribution as seriously as you take your technology product. And through my observations and like internally, that's just not been the case. Like people take building the product so much more seriously in terms of the money and time they spend on it than distribution. Distribution oftentimes an afterthought. And I think distribution needs to be taken just as seriously as product. And one way is really to make content a main part of someone's job. At my organization, it's a main part of somebody's job, and really that's the only way to scale. Another way, sort of once you do find that it's the main part of somebody's job, is to write guides. So at Upsolve, we have several freelance attorney writers who are former bankruptcy attorneys that on the side are writing content for us that we pay them for. And the way that we're able to scale this is we write extensive 20, 30-page guides on how to write content for Upsolve, what types of words to use, the language to use, so that they're on brand with us. And we do a lot of work to workshop with them. And we have editor guides, too. We have freelance editors. This is the way we've sort of scaled our content creation. And then sort of we fueled it once we had this process in mind with money. So first, I figured out, my team figured out how to write the content ourselves, how to do the research ourselves. We wrote out a guide on how to write content, and then sort of have started fueling it with money. So that's the first part, is really on content, making sure content is great. The second thing is around link building. And I think this is really unique because it's where nonprofits have a special advantage. So a link building is basically when someone else links to your site. It's literally when someone says, like, on their site, Ohio Legal Aid with a hyperlink to Ohio Legal Aid, the website, or Philadelphia Legal Assistance with a link. That's link building. Nonprofits have an advantage because there's a lot more opportunities to build links on what you might consider high domain authority websites. So for example, .gov websites, .edu websites, and many .org websites are viewed as more prestigious by Google because by and large, like, it's not so easy to have a .gov, .edu, .org website that's very credible and that has a lot of links itself pointing there. So .gov websites are a lot less likely to link to profit-maximizing.coms than they are to .orgs, which they're potentially funding. So that's where I think there's a really unique moat for nonprofits that are going after SEO as a channel. So at Upsolve, we talk about it as verticals, and we have sort of strategies for these different verticals. One reason we care a lot about media is not just because of the earned media stories we're able to share, but because of links. So for example, when the New York Times linked to Upsolve in 2018, that helped us a lot because it raised our domain authority as well. And that's something we continue to want to do. Other nonprofits, if you email me, I'm sure Upsolve is happy to link you guys on our website. So this is something that I think people should take advantage of, is asking their friends in the nonprofit community that serve a similar demographic of people to link to them and list them on their resource pages, or to write maybe a guest post on their blog. Government websites, law school websites. Maybe you have a local law school that has a directory or has a blog about innovative technology projects, and asking to guest post on there, or getting those law schools to write about you. Those are sort of easy wins that are not available to the NOLOs and the LegalZooms of the world. So a few tips. This is just about any outreach in general, but being personalized in your outreach, being useful, making sure that when you're actually reaching out, you're very clear, hey, you run a domestic violence shelter. A lot of people who are victims of domestic violence fall into debt as a result of their abusive relationships. We think that Upsolve would be a great resource for these people who you're helping. And it's a way to be very useful to people who might not know about your resource. So I think when you're building links, it has to make sense. Following up as well, of course, always, and really being persistent about sort of when you're doing this outreach, making sure people know about you. So feel free to email me, rohan@upsolve.org, and happy to share a list of the tools that we use for our content, our domain authority, and if you have any specific questions, happy to chat. Thanks.
And now we'll hear from Susan about Ohio Legal Help.
So a couple things about Ohio Legal Help. We're technically a redesign of an existing website, but the new website's been really live since about September. So we're about 4 months old. So we're barely off our tummies, let's just say that. When we inherited traffic, we inherited very little. It had been a legacy statewide website that I think when we inherited that traffic, it was like maybe between 50 to 100 visits a day. So we knew that we would have to incorporate SEO as part of our strategy, because you can build the most beautiful thing, have the most amazing content, so you think it's useless if no one comes to it, right? You go there with a mission, you want to help low-income folks, you want to increase access to justice, that all sounds great, but if no one knows you exist, it's not very helpful. So we knew that. We had wonderful help from a skills-based volunteer from Thomson Reuters. And I can't emphasize enough for a brand new nonprofit what having a skills-based volunteer does in terms of helping you think through SEO or the issues, because Thomson Reuters has a program where essentially they provide pro bono, but it's technical assistance, right? And now we're also getting skills-based volunteers from LexisNexis as well, which happens to be in Dayton. So when we met with our skills-based volunteer, he said, "What do you have a lot of?" I said, "I have a lot of stakeholders." And he says, and you can see some of them, and that's not even all of them. And I put the great seal of the state of Ohio because we have so many state agencies who were our stakeholders as part of this process. So he says, "You have plenty of this, you don't have plenty of money." So he said, "Let's think through what that means." And so he helped us think through. So he's a big proponent of something called EAT, which came out of the 2018 Google guidelines, and it's about improving your expertise, authoritativeness, and trustworthiness. So he wanted us to focus on that, and he knew I had a limited budget, right? And it comes from the 2018 Google guidelines, again, but Google's a black box, that talks about your money or your life websites, and he said, "I think you fit within that, because the information you're providing can hurt someone's pocketbook or help, right? But I think it's about like money, happiness, and those types of things. So they're kind of your money or your life. And Google wants to make sure you have high quality content. Content is always king. So as you think about that. So he said, focus on EAT. And so he said, let's focus on authoritativeness. And he said, we can do that through a couple things. Links from authoritative stakeholders and organizations, which I have a lot of. And then mention in their media channels. Again, so a lot of courts and clerks have social media, they have newsletters, they do lots of different things. And he said, make sure that they mention you. And that's going to help with your authoritativeness. But at the end of the day, it really does drive traffic to your site, which also helps. And I can tell you, though, it's easier said than done. So I can say those words, I can do all of that, but it takes time. It's somebody's job. And so right now, we're splitting it between myself and my content manager. So the other thing that Rohan said was make it someone's job. I have a full-time content manager. But it takes the both of us to do this, to really do that engagement so that we can increase traffic to our site. It's absolutely worth the effort. So when I inherited that traffic, we're between 50 to 100. And now we're at about 4 months, and we are nascent our traffic, but we're at about 10,000 visits a month now. So we went from almost nothing to 10,000. So this works. The number one thing, though, is you got to keep at it, and you got to put more and more content. So how do you do it? Well, you got to make it part of your overall communications and marketing plan. Some of you folks are going, do we have a communications and marketing plan? You folks should think about it. It was something that when we started thinking about this, we thought, we have all these stakeholders, we need to engage them now, because you have to engage them early and often, so that they can make it part of their strategy. And there was this moment when the clerk of courts, and by the way, all our clerks are elected, as you folks probably know now, when she said, I'm presenting to all of Cuyahoga County, which is where Cleveland is, and she said, can I present about your website? And I was like, yes. And, I mean, it was just, here's the clerk. She's not going to present about her shop. She's going to present about our website. That's due to 2 years of engagement with her. And so it really does pay dividends. And I mean this. Be useful, be everywhere, speak anywhere. I was telling an early audience, I spoke at a trout club. Yes, they exist. They have trout where you can go fish, apparently. Yep, I live in Ohio. Anyways, but I spoke there because I had an audience and I wanted to engage them, and they're going to leverage their audience, right? Because it's leveraging networks. And make it easy, and I'm going to show how we made it easy. You have to essentially do lots of things to help. So we created a toolkit. Actually, we ended up creating two. One is stakeholder focus. We literally gave them the embed code for our website link with the graphic. We created FAQs so that they could easily answer questions correctly about the site. We did an explainer video that they could put on their YouTube channels, and we placed it on our YouTube channel. They use it in demonstrations. We have a persona called Brenda. Brenda's my favorite person. She's fabulous. You can see a little bit of Brenda over there. And then we provided sample social media posts. Like, we literally cut, paste, and then the how-tos of how to do it. Because if you don't, they won't do it. And then we also did a user-focused toolkit. And so we did a printed card, which I have some, which I'm glad to share with everyone. It's a business card, and that came from Illinois Legal Aid Online. So we engage with other portals that are, really, well known, and we reached out to ILAO and said, tell me what users have said has been the critical thing that's helped them drive to your site. And they said these little business cards, because everyone takes one. They're super easy. It's not collateral you're going to lose, right? So we have distributed 15,000 business cards. And this month we'll distribute another 5,000. Rachel, who's fabulous, has been hoarding them until we could get the 5,000 ordered, because folks ask for them because they're going through them. And then we did a poster, which we co-branded with our stakeholders, because again, co-branding makes us seem like we're great, right? Because they trust them, so we co-branded. And then the next iteration of the posters will have a QR code, right? Because these are static things that stay in someone's waiting area. We're popping up a QR code that gives us better analytics as well. But it also then, they can take that information and with some startup guides with that when they do the QR code. And then we did this quick start guide, because librarians said it'd be helpful if you gave us a quick start guide, because we provided this to the 600 plus libraries in the state of Ohio as well. And so when I say make it easy, I mean create things for them. Now this takes some investment, but once you do it, you can use it over and over again. So one thing I did was made sure that any collateral we owned, and it was stuff that we could manipulate, right? So it wasn't done in a way by some creative shop that we could never touch again. So that's been one thing. Like, I'll make that initial investment, get it professionally designed, because that adds to the authority of it, and then we can use it over and over again. I will say something about the printed cards, which has made our traffic a little unusual. We get more direct traffic to our site than Google, organically. So it's a little unusual. I don't think it's normally that way. Right now, I'd say about 38% of our site, and Google's anywhere between 40, sometimes it's below that, comes to our site directly. That's someone typing in ohiolegalhelp.org and coming directly to our site. And we think these cards have been a big part of that. And so, these things work. And then what this has done is really helped us with our brand visibility, which then also helps us in terms of driving more traffic to the site over time, because that's one of our strategic goals, is on the brand visibility of Ohio Legal Help. So, engage, be useful, make it easy, repeat. And I really mean the repeat. So we make our toolkits easy to access. They're available online, so I'm glad to share the online link with folks if folks want to see exemplars of the work that we did. But then they're also available to print on demand. But we also made it easy to order the collateral from us. So I've spent a lot on postage, but it's worth it. And again, so we make collateral easy to order. We create content. So again, this is making that investment in a full-time content person. We use freelance technical writers instead of attorneys, and then we have expert attorney reviewers that we also pay on occasion as well. We also have pro bono volunteers that review it. And our technical writer is actually, her background is in social psychology. So we're investing in kind of behavioral content and nudges as we think through the work. But we create content for journals, newsletters, websites, trusted blogs, social media, and Google reviews, because Carl, who is our person, said, get Google reviews. That helps with kind of your trustworthiness, and so we're trying to get folks to do that. We've had one of our stakeholders do it. We're going to get more. I mean, it just takes time. Again, this takes time because Google reviews wasn't like on the top of my mind as we're launching, but now we're kind of thinking through that because that helps. Personal outreach and follow-up is something that Rohan said as well. Getting 600 libraries to link to your site takes more than just an email blast. It takes follow-up. It takes going to every regional meeting. It takes going to every annual meeting. I get really tired. Rachel gets really tired. But it's something you have to do. And then some other tips to increase expertise and trustworthiness, things that we hadn't thought about because we thought, oh, that About Us page is an afterthought. He says it's a big thing. He says you have some really great board members who have real authority. You know, we have Jones Day Partners. We have someone from Lexus. Those people have their own bios and their own following, so make sure you highlight them. We have an advisory committee of millions. So we make sure we link to those organizations. They link to us. We make sure that again, that helps increase our level of visibility and our staff as well. He told us to tighten up our privacy policy in terms of use, all things I have to still do. And then this is actually a big lift. He said to create a content team highlight. Because again, it's all about content, the quality of the content, and the expertise of the folks writing it. So he said if you have guest writers, put them on your content team page. Give a little bio, link to their LinkedIn, say who they are. And because he said these are little things that everyone can do that can help. And then Google reviews that I've already mentioned. But again, you know, we're not, I don't have a bunch of technologists, not what we do, but we knew that this was important. And what we've seen is that we're probably increasing our traffic about 20% a month now. I think that's about right. But we'd like to increase more, right? I'd like to double our current traffic within the next 6 months. So that actually requires some technical things related to tags and schema, which I know Margaret's going to talk about. But there's lots of different things regardless of where you are in terms of how you can scale to get increased traffic to your site. And if you have any questions, we're glad to share our toolkits. And we had a really great launch plan as well, again, through a lot of volunteer efforts and just help from a lot of folks, including communications director for the State Bar. And so we're glad to share all of those materials, and my contact information is there.
Hi, everyone. So I'm going to talk less about a particular organization strategy or a case study and more of an overview of what's actually happening on Google when people search for legal problems. For my team and I have a wonderful research assistant, Yue Lee, who I should have her name up here. She's been helping me run search audits. Has anyone ever heard of a search audit before? It had some news because there's increasing numbers of researchers, especially in computer science schools, who are auditing Google for how political results show up or how news sites show up. And our president has even commented on how, you know, search engine algorithms may be biased towards one way or another. So audits are a new way to kind of audit the algorithm that's running the search engine to see what it's actually prioritizing, how it's behaving, and maybe hold it up to some quality standards. So our question for this audit, for this research project, was when people are in a crisis situation that we as lawyers would identify as possibly having a legal remedy, that they should be ending up in the legal system, what does the search engine refer them to? Do jurisdiction correct, and especially public interest sites, in our case meaning non-commercial, a nonprofit or a government or an educational site, how do those place in the top 3 or in the top 10 results, that first page, that precious space, as Rohan was saying? And can we think about how this might be improved in addition to individual organizations investing in SEO? So what we did to try to tackle some of those questions is to run a first version of a search audit. So I'll present the protocol here. I'm very open to questions or comments on how this audit might be improved. We just did our first version of it in November and December of 2019. So what we've been doing at the very high level, I'll get into more details, is we've been running hundreds of searches of Google from specified zip codes. So we can tell our tool what zip code to tell Google it's searching from, as well as what query to search for, and then we record everything that Google is showing to the user. So we have that saved in a giant database, a giant spreadsheet of every single URL, ad, or other kind of content that's showing up on that precious first page. And then we've been running evaluations, both more manual and more quantitative, to figure out what's going right and what's going wrong, mostly wrong, with what's showing up on that precious first page of Google. So more details about that. So how did we know what to even search for? So we chose 4 problem scenarios. We had a meeting in August that Pew, sorry, I'm getting spam calls right now. Hopefully it's not my child's daycare. We had 4 problem scenarios that we thought were pretty your money or your life kinds of situations. Because in our talks with Google, they also said, if you want to change how Google's algorithm works when it comes to legal help searches, you have to focus on your money or your life situations. So we chose your money or your life situations. When you are sued for eviction or unlawful detainer, when you're sued by a debt collector, when your domestic partner may be threatening violence against you, and after a natural disaster like a flood, and you're having problems with a possible scam and a contractor who promised to fix your roof and you didn't. So we wrote these little stories, 2-paragraph stories about these problem scenarios, and we went on to Mechanical Turk, which is a survey service from Amazon, and we recruited people to read these problem scenarios and then to tell us what they would type into Google if they had this situation happen to them. We didn't use the word legal at all in our recruitment of the participants or how we described the problems. We just said, these are life problems. You just came home and there was an eviction notice on your door. Now you're wondering what to do. If you opened Google, what would you type in or say to Google? So for each of those 4 areas, we collected hundreds of possible search queries, and we cut out ones that are repetitive or that were too generic, like call 911 or something like that, where we didn't think they were necessarily going to be useful. And then we saved those as a list. So you can see some examples up there. So for domestic violence, some of the queries that people had were, partner threatened me, steps to take when being threatened in a relationship, where to go for advice with a troublesome relationship, leaving a toxic situation. I won't read them all out, but you can see people generally use somewhere between like 3 words if they're just doing a high-level description, or sometimes they write a full question, something that's more like a statement. And this is consistent with the few studies that have been done in UK and Australia about how people tend to write searches when they're searching for legal problems. So we had this list of around 60 to 80 search queries for each of our 4 problems. Then we collaborated with a wonderful group at the Computer Science School at Northeastern University in Boston. There's a lab called the Lazar Lab, and they're the ones who are doing these search audits of Google for political news. They've developed open source tools to let other people, like other researchers like our team, to similarly do these hundreds of Google searches that you can record into a spreadsheet. So we used their tool to run each of the about 70 queries for each of the 4 problem areas, and we told Google that we were from 5 different zip codes. This is in part because we're doing TIG projects. Our lab is doing TIG projects with partners in Hawaii and with North Florida. So we're doing this audit to see what the current state of search looks like. So if we do improvements, we can see how things improve. So we had 2 zip codes from Hawaii and 3 from North Florida, and we recorded what's showing up on those pages. And then we spent a month and a half looking through what actually showed up, because we had tens of thousands of results. So let me try to recap our main findings of what Google is actually showing to people in North Florida or Hawaii in those 4 problem areas. So in 3 of the areas, other than domestic violence, there's a huge imbalance towards commercial sites being shown in the top 10 results, as well as in the top 3 results. So you can see .coms on the left. Most results are coming from .coms, which are not necessarily not nonprofits or public interest sites, but we can guess are mostly commercial. We dug into it more in our manual review. So mostly commercial sites. Domestic violence was an outlier. There were more .org and .gov sites, and I'll talk about that a little bit more. But generally, much fewer .org or .gov and very few .edu. In terms of how many ads were showing up on that first page, or the percentage of that page's real estate that were given over to ads, it was around 10% for most of the queries. There wasn't that big of a difference. Domestic violence and debt collection had almost 15% of the pages given over to ads. Those ads could have been from nonprofits. In fact, in domestic violence, many of the ads were from hotlines or .orgs, but that had used an ad strategy to get that placement. For debt collection, flood contractor, and eviction, most of the ads were for either legal services or, in the flood contractor, other contractors who are trying to get your services. Overall, for all 4 of the queries and all 5 of the zip codes, these were the top 9 results that really dominated. And Nolo.com, by far and away, was the most frequent site to appear in the top 10 results, the first page. Nolo.com, by far the highest ranked, or the one that had the most consistently high placement. And then you can see the other sites. So all of them are .coms except for the InCharge.org, which is a debt collection nonprofit. Most of them are national sites that have national content, so not specific to jurisdiction, not really that actionable, but that have these kind of SEO-friendly, very generic articles that are correct to the issue, like they are about housing and landlord issues, or they are about debt collection issues. But they're the kind of articles that are probably 600 to 1,000 words that says, you were sued by a debt collector. This is a problem. You may have options. You might have to go to court, or you could hire a lawyer, or you could try to settle. And like very generic paragraphs that help the user, but only at the very abstract level of understanding maybe 3 or 4 generic options they have. They don't have links to local legal aid, services, self-help centers, or courts. They have no jurisdiction-specific information. So it's these kind of SEO-oriented sites that are most likely there to either drive people to purchase legal services, like on Nolo.com, or to purchase legal books, or to get ad or other kind of interest for the other commercial sites. So, for example, in rural Oahu, when people are searching for debt collection, most people are directed to Nolo.com, NerdWallet.com, ConsumerHelpCentral.com, news sites, a lot of news sites like WashingtonPost.com, USNews.com, WUSA9.com. So again, these are mostly national commercial websites that have this content there as something that gets them commercial benefit, and it's not so much about helping people actually take action. Also, what people in Pensacola searching for debt collection see versus those in Oahu, Hawaii see is virtually the same on that first page. There's very little difference. There's almost no local sites except for the ads. The ads are more jurisdiction correct. Google shows sensitivity to that. But for the actual non-ad content, it's virtually the same. Nolo.com, NerdWallet.com, ConsumerHelpCentral.com. It's virtually the same results regardless of where you're searching from. Nolo.com is dominant, and then the other kinds of sites are a lot of legal referral sites. So legal referral sites have written this short content mainly to get people to hire lawyers, national news sites, and commercial lifestyle sites, especially in domestic violence. A lot of sites talking about Psychology Today or relationship sites, ones you've probably seen if you've ever done searches that have to do with relationships at all. Domestic violence queries were definitely the outlier in this small world of 4 different queries. So this search from Honolulu is pretty representative of all 5 of our jurisdictions. We have a lot of national nonprofits, and national government lines and hotlines showing up in domestic violence searches. Still, TheGuardian.com, which has a generic article about relationships and how to deal with toxic relationships, is the top hit. But then we can see a lot of .govs and .orgs. And the .orgs you see there that might seem a little scammy, like joinonelove.org, loveisrespect.org, those are all youth-oriented domestic violence resources. How to spot if you're in an abusive relationship, and here's a hotline you can call. So we see a lot more public interest sites, though all at the kind of national level, directing to national hotlines, which I'm not going to say is a good or bad thing. When we do see local-oriented websites, I don't know, can anyone pick out any jurisdiction-specific websites on there for our Honolulu search? Number 6, masslegalhelp.org. Does anyone run masslegalhelp.org? Because you're doing a good job on SEO, but for Honolulu too. Also, we have Iowa. We have domestic violence protectors in Iowa at number 8. So again, it's terrific. It's a .org. It's public interest. And it is interesting with domestic violence. There's a lot more national front door that will direct you locally. But we as a community can decide if this is concerning or not, that there's not any local Law Help Hawaii or Legal Association of Hawaii showing up in the top 4, in the top 10. Eviction was another interesting one. So we did a different thing in our user story of eviction. There we told people that they were in a certain state when they were getting evicted, when we were doing our survey and getting people to write search queries. So in that story, we had told people, you live in California and you just came home and you have an eviction notice on your door. What would you search on Google? Blah, 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 blah. So there, of our 80 queries, about 40 of our queries had an explicit mention of like rental laws in San Francisco or landlord abusing me in California. There was explicit mention of a jurisdiction. That wasn't the case in the other 3 queries. So we saw a much higher number of public interest sites showing up when there was that mention of the jurisdiction in the query itself. So for example, in the eviction search from Pensacola, yay, we have a .gov at number 6. It's the Florida Department of Agriculture and Consumer Services, yay. So they not necessarily are gonna have a great guide to protecting yourself in eviction, but they do have referrals to the Florida Law Help, which shows up at number 8. And Florida Law Help probably would be the best site there to find public interest guides to your local Florida options in Pensacola. We still have a lot of national commercial websites, though, dominating. state.fl.us also appears, though that's not for the court site, it's for legislation. So if you do want to look up the legislation about eviction, you can find it at number 4. Generally, when we look at all of the results for all of the queries in all of the locations, it's not a pretty picture for government and court websites. They did better than legal aid websites. Our national .govs from FTC, from HUD, from Women's Health, Consumer Finance, USA.gov, and even the Program Support Center for Government Business Management appeared a healthy number of times. About the same time that like NOLA was there in the thousands, FTC.gov was there at like 72, which is probably good for debt collection. Local government websites did not perform as well. So Hawaii.gov appeared 91 times. That includes court sites. Florida's Department of Agriculture and Consumer Services, it's cut off, but it appeared 42 times. The court websites in Hawaii, explicit ones, appeared 48. The Florida courts only appeared 6 times, and the local clerk's offices in the Florida counties in North Florida appeared around 14, 7, or 3 times, which is very, very low. NOLO appeared 1,192 times. Statewide legal help portals, we would hope that those would place really well. Florida's did better than Hawaii's, so Florida's portal appeared in 117 search results. Hawaii's portal only appeared 9 times. Legal Aid Hawaii, which is the major legal aid provider in Hawaii, only appeared 6 times. Legal Services of North Florida only appeared 2 times, and Three Rivers Legal Services, also a North Florida provider, appeared 9 times. These were lower or at the same average as foreign government sites were appearing, whether from Australia, Virginia, or San Francisco. So let's answer a real quality question that we know as lawyers really matters to people getting actionable correct help. Does Google get jurisdiction right when people search? Well, we know that they're definitely sending people to foreign governments at an alarming rate, not like terrifying, but in that top 10, there are sites from Australia, UK, Canada, Singapore, and New Zealand appearing regularly. So all English-speaking countries, but probably not with legal advice that carries over. We also see, I see Jack in, Pine Tree Legal Aid, bravo, you guys are doing great on SEO. So you appeared 38 times in our North Florida and Hawaii results. Washington Law Help, anyone in the house from them? You guys got 40, so you beat Jack and Maine. Oregon 22, Connecticut 19. Just as an example, if you're in Pensacola and you search for a domestic violence problem, on the first page you will get results from Alaska's Victim Assistance Program, Tucson prosecutors, California courts, Massachusetts Law Help, and Vancouver Police. So maybe that will be of help. I think that is concerning. So let's think about what we can do. SEO, definitely. In addition, I'm very invested in schema.org markup. Does anyone know what schema.org markup is? All right, we've got some, great. So this schema.org, for those of you who don't know, you can also go to the website schema.org instead of listening to me, but it's a nonprofit consortium of the major search providers, particularly Google, Microsoft's Bing, Yahoo, which is now using Bing, and I think Yandex, where they decided we need to have structured ways that our search crawlers, as they go around the web and see what's out there, can understand what's on those websites so that we can serve better to our customers. And what they recommend, this nonprofit consortium, they put out standards by which websites can mark things up, hidden in their backend so users don't see what's there. But if you apply this markup, this JSON file, which is somewhat human readable, you tell them, hey, I'm a web page. This is the name of my web page, all about Kansas divorce. What are keywords? Keywords are divorce, annulment, divorce form, spousal support. If people are searching for those words, Google, Microsoft, Yahoo, send them to us. Here's a description of who we are. You can even put in that you're a nonprofit, or that you're funded by the Legal Services Corporation. You can communicate all these good authoritative things about yourself in this markup. You paste it into the back end of your home page and individual pages, and then Google's and other search engines, crawlers, will see this about you and know more about your page and who to direct it to. You can also put your jurisdiction covered in there. We serve these given counties or the whole state of Kansas. If the promise of schema.org markup is one that you've probably seen play out if you search for a restaurant or a tire store or a hospital or many other service providers, that if you put your information in this structured way, Google will reward you by giving you this kind of priority box treatment of more real estate, pictures, maps, call-outs. This is just a mock-up of what we hope to get for. Part of our TIG with Legal Services of North Florida is to work with stakeholders and say, what would a good priority box for a legal aid organization look like? Can we say what we can help with, who we serve or don't serve, how to contact us at the very least? So as we put more structured information out there, Google can hopefully know who to send to us and then also to present us with much more real estate. Part of our TIG project is to make it really easy for website administrators or other people who want their website to place better to create that markup. So we are creating this tool that if you have your information about your contact information, counties served, issue areas, keywords, you can put it into a spreadsheet in the format that we can share with you, and then we can generate your markup for you. And then you can have your website administrator paste it in, or if you have WordPress or Drupal or other backends, and we're working with Urban Insight and Pro Bono Net on this too, to make it really easy to have this markup applied to your website. So it's a really important investment along with all the SEO things. We're very happy to share. We really want this to be shared, especially as we get it finalized with our partners in North Florida and Hawaii. I think that's all for me. Please feel free to reach out to me if you're interested in working on this project. Great.
So we have some time for questions, and I have a couple of questions. Upsolve is primarily a service that helps people file for bankruptcy, but it's kind of interesting that now you're also in the content business. Like you're not a statewide website, you're a service provider, but being a content provider is kind of necessary as an expansion of your mission. I guess that's more of a comment.
Well, I actually have, something to say about that, which is just like I was saying earlier, I think that thinking about product and distribution as equally important and equal core competencies, one not more important than the other or more prestigious at our organization than the other, is a really important thing that we did culturally, which has been really helpful to grow. And then the second thing I'll talk about is, just want to mention, is I think that time on site is an advantage that you can really win when you have a product rather than just pure content, because most people who visit Upsolve, our average time on site, their tools to figure out what your competitors are, ours is between 3 and 4 times higher than NOLO. So NOLO is our biggest competitor for search because of the bankruptcy content they have. But most people who are on NOLO, they sort of are just looking for an attorney or just end up matching with an attorney. There's no free service on NOLO to help you file for bankruptcy on your own. And that is my underlying thesis for why in certain search results we've beaten NOLO, and why in the long run we will beat NOLO, is because ultimately our product is just so much better than what NOLO provides. And I do think that through time on site and through sort of whatever Google has to identify UX, we will in the long run beat them.
Yeah, and I just want to echo what Rohan was saying during his presentation about how nonprofits have an advantage. I think as nonprofits, when we look at our budgets, we might think there's no way that we can compete with those big corporations like LegalZoom that have so many different employees. But Upsolve is not that big, and they're not that old. But I was doing a Google search the other day for Free Lawyer Philadelphia, and guess who popped up? Upsolve. I didn't even mention the word bankruptcy, and he's just dominating that SEO. Just with a budget that's pretty small compared to a lot of legal service organizations. So yeah, it definitely can be done. I think we can get to the top. But one of the things that I was thinking during this presentation was, even if we are service providers, writing content and continuing to write content is important. So I wonder whether this calls into question the statewide website model, where LSC grantees, legal service organizations, merely submit content to the central state website, and that's the one source of information. But aren't we kind of in competition with great sites like Ohio Legal Help? Because we want people who have legal problems to come to our sites as well, and we want funders to see our site. I don't know if you have any comments on whether whether legal services is in competition now with.
Wow. Okay. Don't talk to legal aid. There's no one from Ohio, is there? I think we are trying to think of it as an ecosystem, right? And we're trying to think through, while legal aid may not have the #1 position in terms of their website, right? Legal aid has a never-ending supply of clients, right? And so we're trying to think through how we balance that, right? So that if Ohio Legal Help can improve its SEO and its positioning, at least we're getting good, authoritative information to folks in Ohio about Ohio-specific things, right? And actually, we have a simple like and dislike, and our bankruptcy page is actually one of our most liked things. It's because we provide almost, oddly enough, very little information, but we quickly link to legal aid organizations, and so we get them to the right place quickly. And so I think we're trying to think of it more as that, if we can provide information content, we can get folks to the right resource quickly, before like a scammer or somebody else kind of, like a debt, not that we don't love debt settlement companies, but I'm just saying like before something like that happens. So I think we're thinking of it as like an ecosystem in terms of thinking through that. But, you know, I think there's always going to be some friction between that. But like, for instance, I know that the Ohio websites still have content on their websites. But I think over time, my guess is that Ohio Legal Help will supplant that. So I think there's going to be a tension of that. And it's something that I don't have a perfect answer for. I think it's something that we're going to have to work together in partnership with. But I think we're trying to think of the goal as how do we get low-income folks to the correct information as quickly as possible, and not to, like for instance, we have landlordtenant.com, like ohiolandlordtenant.com, beats us every single time. Every single time. Every search, I don't care what I'm searching, because we did a volume search. Eviction is one of the highest volume searches for legal issues in Ohio. Oh, I shouldn't be plugging them, but ohiolandlordtenant.com pretty much beats us every single time, unless I put in Ohio Legal Help. So, I mean, this tells you how important having someone full-time dedicated to this is. In terms of the content, whether it's for like a newsletter, we do that. We'll even do things for blogs. We've done things for social media. We would consider them reputable, authoritative social media influencers. We've done Twitter, we've done different kind of content for them as well, but it's a full-time person. And then in addition, we have some freelancers that help us. And so that's the way we do it. So it's a mix of having a full-time person who kind of herds those individuals, but also it's really important that, I think like Rohan was saying, we have very explicit style guides. Because one thing that this is just a lesson learned for us, we had too many freelancers, and they just weren't getting the voice right. And so they brought over lots of bad habits from their having written for other websites, and we had to actually scale that back and start over again. So I would just want folks to kind of learn from that. It's important that they get your voice right in terms of what your goals and your mission is, but we use a combination full-time plus contract.
Exact same for us. Yeah.
And what types of skills should these writers have? Do they need to be lawyers if they're going to be writing about legal topics?
Yeah, I think it depends. Like really, for bankruptcy, we tried working with bankruptcy paralegals, just tried non-lawyers, and what we just realized is it was a lot easier in our niche to get a bankruptcy lawyer to write like we wanted them to write than get someone who already knew how to write like what we wanted to learn bankruptcy because of all of the intricacies. So that was just our experience.
And we use our writers who work with expert attorneys. They interview them. We have a rubric of the questions they ask in terms of what are the top 3 questions that, you know, you've seen 1,000 clients on this issue. What are the top 3 things they ask you, right? And so we kind of have this rubric of questions, and then our technical writers learn from that, and then they essentially write it, and then it gets an expert review. It is labor intensive, we will admit that, but it works for us, and real people have said they can understand and comprehend the content and feel like they can now go do and write that landlord-tenant letter, right? And so we've tested it as well.
And we have a question here.
I was just wondering how often you update the content or create new content for your website, and does that look like updating and changing a page, or are you just adding blog spots on your own website? Like, how do you continually put content up if you feel like, you know, you've written your pages on what you're all about, and how do you keep that fresh, or are you just adding blogs, or I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, so we certainly update content on a pretty regular basis, like the high value articles that are what you might call evergreen. But for us, like we haven't run out of bankruptcy articles to write about. And one of our loops is, and this is an advantage, I think, of us as a product company that's not just pure like content like Nolo, in the sense that we have people asking our customer service, like our paralegal, like sending us inbound all these questions about bankruptcy, and we learn so much about what people are asking, what their intent is, that we then translate into actual articles. So that feedback loop is really important.
What we did, so we call it pejoratively summer of 2017. So what we did was we created these really intricate content trees based upon, we talked with both consumers and stakeholders. So like just for the consumer tree alone, we had advocates from the Federal Trade Commission, we had advocates from the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, we had someone from ADR, and we said, if you could create a content tree that had the information that consumers needed, what would you do? And they created these really intricate content trees that we're still working through. We're never going to run out of content. And so we have both what we consider our maintenance plan, where all the articles get tagged with, well, we need to make sure we review this, even though the law is evergreen, just to make sure that we're responding to data that we're getting from our site, right? But then we also have a fairly robust content plan that we almost run content sprints. That's the only way that I can think about it. We have basically a monthly sprint for content in terms of our goals, and then we have what our quarterly and what our yearly goals are. Like for instance, and we do product in the form of both our forms and our guided interviews. So we know that a big lift that we have is actually trying to think through how we do driver's license reinstatement. And so we need to think through what resources, that's a big content thing for us, because for us, when we do that, we're going to try to think through how do we actually integrate with the BMV, right? So that folks aren't putting in all of their driver's license records one by one or picking from a tree, because it's just users won't complete it. And so we have a pretty intricate content plan, and then we're still working off those content trees from those experts.
We had a question back here.
So first, I think Margaret deserves accolades for being on so many presentations at this conference. I don't know how she does it. Congratulations. So my question is for Margaret. When you did the methodology for tracking search results, sometimes when people search, like for a divorce, they might search, I need a divorce, or they might search, for example, divorce Los Angeles if they're aware that context matters. Did you find any evidence that that was happening, that people were aware for their searches that geography matters, or were you just counting on Google to know that I'm in Los Angeles, therefore maybe I care about what happens there?
Well, that was one of our questions, and that's why we played. So all of the searches that we ran were based on this simulation that we had given to these survey takers. So in the eviction story, we said, like the first line was like, you live in California, now read these 2 paragraphs. In the other 3 scenarios, we didn't mention where you live. And in those other 3 scenarios, no one mentioned their location in their search. Again, it's still in a survey environment. It would be great to have Google's data about exactly what they know people are searching for in this broad cluster of divorce queries. That's not available. I've tried to negotiate for it. The only way to do it is to get inside Google with an NDA or a contractor position or a researcher position. So I'm thinking about that. But yeah, so we have these simulated queries when people, so we know that Google doesn't differentiate for the main results unless that word is there. So Google is not hypothesizing that you're in Pensacola based on the zip code. They're just looking at the issue area. Except for ads. The ads are jurisdiction sensitive, and we know they can do that. And so we're having a big meeting with Google and other search providers at the end of this month with the Chief Justice of Ohio is coming out, leadership from LSC and from other groups. And we're gonna talk with the tech providers, showing them this audit result and see if they might change how their algorithm treats at least legal queries, especially around jurisdiction.
The ads are the worst thing.
Well, that's they're also very expensive. I don't know, Google, you might know, might be a little rich. So if we make it enough of a civic argument, and this is where there's really instructive examples from voting. So I don't know if any of you worked on the Voting Information Project, which grew out of a collaboration with the Kennedy School at Harvard and Pew Charitable Trusts, including Lester Bird. But there they got huge amounts of real estate for election and voting information. So if anyone was searching for anything around their election, the whole search page is overtaken with an authoritative box from Google and all of the procedural information about your local voting, rights, ability, procedure. It would be terrific if we could get to that with legal. We don't have the content ready for that, but we can imagine a future where Google gives us that amount of real estate because eviction is so important, or domestic violence is so important, or other areas are so important.
Great panel, fantastic mix of perspectives. I wanted to follow up on the jurisdiction front, specifically for Margaret and the schema.org framework. And I'd read that you guys were exploring developing some add-ons, if you will, within the schema.org framework. And that administrative area, for example, was something you're exploring for jurisdictions specifically. I work in Canada at a nonprofit that does public legal education, and I'm keenly interested in any kind of update on that area of exploration.
So if you want to geek out and go to schema.org, you'll see there's hundreds, if not thousands, of terms that businesses mainly have used to tag and mark themselves up so they're findable, discoverable. We're thinking about going to Google and asking for a legal cluster of terms, just like they have in health. They have an extensive health extension, so all kinds of terminology or categories of terms around diseases and treatments and pharmaceuticals and other things that are really specific to healthcare providers. That was the American Medical Association and Mayo Clinic working directly with Google to say, you need to work with us to make all of these specialty terms. We're trying to figure out how many specialty terms we actually need in the legal space. We're trying to do the best that we can within the existing terms. This is part of our negotiations with the technology companies if we get that special treatment a la the health community.
Just to follow on, Margaret, would you go with the 20 from NSMI2 to start? Sorry, Jonathan, thanks. Wouldn't you start with the 20 from NSMI2 as, I know there's 1,000 plus subcategories, but a great place to start?
Well, those are the end destinations. So what we want in schema.org is something like issue area served equals, and then we would call back to the taxonomy and say issue area served by Legal Services of North Florida, Immigration, Housing, Family, Veterans Affairs. We could list all 20 maybe, not crime. So that's what the taxonomy part is for, directing that schema term to the right issue areas. Yeah.
Hi, thanks for the information. It's been really useful. I'm just wondering if anyone on the panel or in this room, many years ago we set up like a Google Ad Grants account and didn't really spend a whole lot of time on it. I saw that it's still a thing, but I don't know if it's like worth spending any time on or.
So for us, it was not useful at all for bankruptcy because there were so many caveats. One thing that happened recently is people started buying ads for Upsolve, which is so we didn't do this sort of this defensive thing where these for-profit companies know that people are now searching Upsolve, and now Google is basically forcing us to pay to win our own search traffic. So that is a really bad thing that Google is doing, so maybe we can afford the Upsolve Google ads with the Google Ad Grant, but I don't see another use.
Yeah, and we'll probably do it, but it was actually not one of the recommendations from our SEO person, right? He gave us a lot of technical things in terms of the tagging and lots of things like that we're still working through a whole list, right? And he did an audit for us, and it was just, and then I try to set up the account, and they make it hard. They make it very hard, and I think they've made it really hard now, because I did this like 5 years ago, and it was like, hey, you're C3, here it is, right? And so we wanted to set up we thought, why not? They've made it so hard for us to do because of the type of site that we are, that, and legal ads are just expensive, and they just don't want, and they're being really difficult with us, to be fair. I called the Google Ads team just to get some, as to what they didn't like, as to why we couldn't get approved, and they wouldn't give us anything. They basically said, try again. I mean, it's really, they've made it very hard now to get Google Ads for this type of site. We will probably try again. I think the one piece of useful information I got was we won't approve anything that has your name in it as a keyword. So I was like, our name's Ohio Legal Help. It was like, well, yeah, go. I mean, that's really what they said. And then they also said they wouldn't approve an account with single keywords in the query, even though I had run a search to make sure that there wasn't anything that was low scoring, set all that up. So we had to go through and remove all of our, and then I think they didn't like the fact that one of our Google extensions, like site extensions, was bankruptcy. I'm pretty sure, because they gave us a warning saying essentially that because it's about debt and that consumers can be preyed upon, like on debt, that but they wouldn't give me any direction. So we'll probably try again, but it hasn't been a big part of our SEO strategy.
All right, we only have a minute, but here's one more question.
I'll just follow on and say we use it and we've had success with it. It is hard, no doubt. It's a whole maintenance program in and of itself, and no one-word keywords. You have to have a click-through rate of 5%, so 1 in 20 need to be clicking your ad. We never score well, like we're never the top ad, but nevertheless, it's from 2% to like 17%, depending on keywords, depending on a range of different content. So again, one of those things we find worthwhile, but it's continuous maintenance.